good to see you all here. Where's Darby? Oh, downstairs. Oh. You know, the hymn I was thinking of is the Holly Near song, We're Gentle, Angry People. Do you know that song? And we were talking about anger because I did a Zoom meeting and I was the only man, the rest were women, talking about anger. And they were kind of pro-anger, and I was, since I worked with gang members, and I know how dangerous anger can be. But anger, when controlled, can be a really positive thing. And she wrote that song, Holly Near wrote that song, after the assassination of Harvey Milk, being a lesbian herself. Also, the person that's forgotten is Willie Moscone, the mayor. He was killed also, and that's when Dianne Feinstein came into view. But it's a really good song. How many of you are familiar with it? Yeah. So, but we're not doing it. Okay, first slide. Women of note, yep. Okay, Gail Geisenhainer is the Minister Emerita of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Ann Arbor, which she served for 8 years. I first experienced her presence when she gave, excuse me. When she gave a powerful sermon at Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly of 2006 in Portland, Oregon, at our Sunday service. Now, how many of you have been to GA? Okay, a couple of you. The Sunday service at our GA is the last event for the whole week. And it's an event in which we invite all the townspeople to come and partake of our Sunday service. And it's the one time we Unitarian Universalists can experience what it feels like to be in a mega church. Because there's 1,000 or 2,000 people there, and even that's small for mega church, right? Now, the sermon that Gail gave is called "We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest." Gail is a large woman. I mean, she's maybe as big as me, actually, with an infectious smile and embracing and friendly voice. You can see that, right? How many of you met her or know her? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Well, she retired in 2016, so that's almost 10 years ago. So, she told her story about how she was driving a snowplow in Maine and feeling very sorry for herself. And a friend of hers invited her to his church. And she rudely refused, saying, all blanking churches are the same, although I don't think she said blanking. And she informed them, they say they're open, but they don't want queer folk. To heck with church. Again, I think she cleaned up the language. But her friend persisted, and she relented, and she describes her first visit this way. And by the way, most churches in America are under 100 members, the majority, and especially in Maine, which there were a large number of Universalist churches that were small. So I imagine this small church used to be a Universalist, now is Unitarian Universalist. And I think of myself more as a Universalist. Many of you heard that story before, right? So this is what she said. I dressed so carefully for my first Sunday visit. I spiked my short hair straight up into the air. I dug out my heaviest, oldest work boots, the ones with a chainsaw cut that exposed the steel toe. I got my torn blue jeans in my leather jacket. There would be not a shred of ambiguity this Sunday morning, They would embrace me in my full Amazon glory, or they could fry ice. I carefully arranged my outfit so it would highlight the rock-hard chip I carried on my shoulder. I bundled up every shred of pain and hurt and betrayal I had harbored from every other religious experience in my life, and I lumbered into a tiny meeting house on the coast of Maine. Blue jeans and boots, leather jacket, spiked hair, and belligerent attitude. I accepted my friend's invitation. I went to his church. I expected gray-haired ladies in the foyer to step back in fear. That would have been familiar. Instead, they stepped forward, offered me a bulletin, a newsletter, invited me to stay for coffee, which was so odd. They never even flinched. They called me dear, but they pronounced it dia. Stay for coffee, dia? I can't do that accent. I stayed for coffee. I stayed for Unitarian Universalism. Gail went on to talk about how that little old lady in that little church in Maine accepted her, guided her, and appreciated her, so much so that she became the senior minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Ann Arbor. After the sermon, I was talking to GA folk, and we agreed that's one of the best sermons we ever heard. And you can see it, if you go to uua.org, you can see the video of it. It's an amazing sermon. I remarked about my experiences working with little old ladies. They were my favorite people to work with. I thoroughly enjoyed them. And I then said, it would be the little old ladies who will save the world. For it's their compassion, acceptance, and appreciation of others that will win the day and guide us to help us bring the possibility of peace in the world. The others agreed with me. We need that kind of power of women in our lives, of compassion, acceptance, and appreciation. And if we can do that, if we can listen carefully, understand, then I say that there is still hope for a better day. Today I will celebrate several women, some well known, others not. And I will begin with one that I believe many of you know of. Carolyn Bartlett Crane. How many of you know of her? Not everybody, huh? I thought more people would know her. She was born in 1858, died in 1935. She was American Unitarian minister. What? 1835. What did I say, 1935? Yeah, 1935. Oh, yeah, it's 1935. Oh, God. Did I screw that up? Imagine that, I screwed it up. Who would imagine? Did I say? Oh, my God. She went back in time, huh? Oh, God. Well, she died 1935. God. Anyway, and she was a Unitarian minister, a suffragist, a civic reformer, educator, and journalist. Quite a broad experience. And she later was known as America's housekeeper for her efforts to improve urban sanitation. After being a teacher for 4 years, she turned to journalism in 1884, working for 3 years at the Minneapolis Tribune, and later as a city editor for the Oshkosh Daily Morning Times. In 1889, she was ordained and became a pastor of Unitarian Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. After 3 years, her success in that church led her to accepting the pastorship of a larger Unitarian church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which she had named People's Church. But then she fell into she had a falling out with the board. And God, I know about that. And then she became ill. So she left People's Church. But she fell into what she called Ministry of Neglected Municipalities. And she developed new vocation, expecting public health systems, infrastructures of large communities and telling people how to improve what they had. She would write reports, and these reports would be disseminated through many cities in the nation, and these cities often used her reports to create new public policy. She had conversations with the city's bacteriologists to learn more about the city's water and food supply, its sewage disposal, and other sanitation procedures. She was able to show the city government how to clean the street of the horse refuse. Remember, there weren't many cars back in the turn of the 20th century, right? And so she developed these methods that made the streets cleaner, but also saved the city money. But guess what? The city fathers ignored her. So, the one victory she did have, and it took a great deal of effort on her part, was, and she even said she would never do it again, but people didn't believe her. But she went to the state government in Lansing and ushered through a bill that reformed the slaughterhouses, because she discovered that these slaughterhouses had filthy barns from disease as well as healthy animals. Now, I'll talk about this other part of her, next slide. Every Man's House, that's what she called Every Man's House. Do you know this house? 2602 or 2606? Westnedge Avenue, across from Crane Park. It was built as an entry into Better Homes in America contest in 1924, emerged as a first place winner among more than 1,000 entries. Actually, my friends, John and Lynn Kinch, any of you know John and Lynn? Yeah, they led Peace Pizzazz here. They're now near Durham, North Carolina. But they came to visit, and they stayed at this house. And it's a very comfy house. I mean, it's old, 1924. It's like 100 years, right? But this was designed by Crane to be a home built around Mother. With that goal in mind, Crane designed a 5-room cottage suitable for average American family of small income, with 2 parents and 2 or 3 children. With a low gate in the doorway, Mother at work could watch her baby at play. Next slide. So that's what it looks on the inside. And you know what I really admire about her is that she made this for people with modest means. She wasn't building McMansions to make a lot of money. She was working for the people, and I really admire that. So the next slide is somebody you all know, our priest here. Now, I got the dates right on that, don't I? Yeah. Coretta Scott King. There's so much to say about her. And, you know, by the way, this is sort of like a book report. I'm just doing sketches of 4 women here. And maybe I'll pique your interest, and you may want to study one or more of these women later. But Coretta Scott King was an intellectual. She met her husband at Boston University. She, like I said, she was an intellectual in her own right, even though she was overshadowed by her famous husband. She was an amazing singer, and she sang songs to support her husband, songs about social justice, about civil rights, and songs to promote the end of poverty in America. Now, I want to refer to one event that was shortly after the Montgomery bus strike. Montgomery bus strike started in December of 55 and ended in December 1956. She was in their house with her 2 children and a couple of friends, and they heard a brick thrown on the front porch. And so she gathered up everybody and took her to the other end of the house to the guest room. Then they heard an explosion that shook the house. Martin came back home to witness the damage and see how everyone was. They suffered no damage, but the house did. Both Coretta's father and father-in-law wanted her to move out of Montgomery to a safer place, but she refused. Author Octavia B. Vivian wrote, "That night, Coretta lost her fear of dying. She committed herself more deeply to the freedom struggle as Martin had done 4 days previously when jailed for the first time in his life." Coretta would later call it the first time she realized how much I mean to Martin in the terms of supporting him in what he was doing. He always looked forward to coming home to the warmth of home, being the invitation, the welcome. And he also looked forward to Coretta singing to him because that calmed him down. But Martin was a bit of an old-fashioned man, and he believed the woman's place was in the home. You imagine that? Martin Luther King Jr. believing that? And so they had arguments about that, as you can imagine. And Coretta proved him so wrong on that last idea that after his death, she would go out on her own. And even after taking care of her children and others at the same time, she had a presence in the world for social justice, for peace. She spoke out against war, promoting the idea of working for peace no matter how tempting it is to create a war. It is tempting to create war, but we need to work for peace. That's what she said. She worked for women's rights and self-expression. She opposed apartheid in South Africa. And finally, she spoke out for a group her husband never did, the LGBTQ community. In 1999, at a luncheon for the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, she said, "I still hear people say that I should not be talking about the rights of lesbian gay people, and I should stick to the issues of racial justice. But I hasten to remind them that Martin Luther King Jr. said, 'Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.' I appeal to everyone who believes Martin Luther King's dream to make room at the table of brotherhood and sisterhood for lesbian and gay people." Now, the next woman we're going to celebrate, next slide, it's probably nobody knows, right? Anybody knows who this woman is? Well, she's an amazing woman, really. It's Juliet Hampton Morgan, born 1914, died 1957. I think I have that date right there. So she died at the age of 43, a young woman, right? And I'll explain about that later. Juliet was a fragile woman, full of anxiety, so much so that she couldn't drive a car, so she would take the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And of course, there are a lot of black people in the bus as well as white people. And she noticed the racism and how white people treated black people. And one time she chastised the bus driver who was being really rude to an older black woman passenger. She often wrote letters to the local newspaper, the Montgomery Advertiser, in support of federal anti-lynching laws and to abolish the poll tax. Her first public statements regarding social justice came in 1932, as she spoke out in defense of motherhood and special training for women, such as creating home economics classes, and extending support for creating a federal Department of Child Welfare. Sounds like Carolyn Bartlett Crane, doesn't it? When the crisis that ensued in December of 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in the bus to a white man, Morgan wrote a letter to the Montgomery Advertiser saying this: "The Negroes of Montgomery seem to have taken a lesson from Gandhi. Their own task is greater than Gandhi's, however, for they have a greater prejudice to overcome." They have a greater prejudice to overcome than Gandhi did. One feels that history is being made in Montgomery these days. It is hard to imagine a soul so dead, a heart so hard, a vision so blinded and provincial as not to be moved with admiration at the quiet dignity and discipline and dedication with which the Negroes had conducted their boycott. She was a hell of a writer. And at the time, she was a local librarian in Montgomery. Her library board admonished her not to write letters in the newspaper again, to which she agreed. However, Buford Boone of the Tuscaloosa News came to Montgomery and spoke out against racial injustice there. In response to Boone's advocacy for racial justice, Morgan wrote a personal letter to him. This is a personal letter, private. There are so many Southerners with various walks of life that know you are right. They know what they call our Southern way of life must inevitably change. Many of them even are eager for change, but are afraid to express themselves. So afraid to stand alone, to walk out naked, as it were. Everyone who speaks as you do, who has the faith to do what he believes right in scorn of the consequences, does great good in preparing the way for a happier and more equitable future for all Americans. Again, she's quite a writer. Boone wanted Morgan to publish this later, make it public, but she refused, citing her agreement with the library. But he insisted, so she published it. And then all hell broke out for her. People threw rocks through her windows. Someone burned a cross on her front lawn. And then on the morning of July 17, 1957, Juliet was found dead by her mother next to a bottle of sleeping pills and a suicide note that said, "I'm not going to cause any more trouble to anybody." That is one of the saddest letters I've heard of. It made me think that Juliet Morgan is one of the bravest people I know in history, since she had to overcome so much of her own anxiety to do the right thing. And I have here, years later, they named her to the Alabama. I don't even have it in front of me, unfortunately. Wait a minute, is this it? I'm so organized. No, they named her to the Alabama famous women something. But also, they named the library after her, the Juliet Morgan Memorial Library. So it's a sad thing. And then the last woman I'm going to talk to, I want to mention something that's important. I studied political science at Ohio State, and I want to talk about something that's very important, what I learned about political science. Political science, as one professor told us, our class, is a study of power. And he said power is the ability to get somebody to do something that they would ordinarily do on their own. And of course, there are many ways of getting people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do on their own. You can threaten them physically. You can bribe them, that's famous. Use the military, use the police. And then there's persuasion, like what I try to do and other clergy across the nation do in their places of worship, what teachers try to do, what therapists try to do, trying to get people to change their minds. And frankly, that's a weaker power because it requires time, it requires people listening and having good faith and goodwill to be allowed to be changed and have an open mind and a generous heart. Now we can think of the people who have not had power in our nation, including women, black people, Native Americans. Women were treated as children, such that a woman could live in a house with her husband for many years, and then if a husband dies, she's treated as a ward of the state, and she doesn't own the house. And forget about she can't vote, Also, it's not that long ago, that when a woman got married, that the Social Security would automatically change her last name to her husband's name. And that we note that women have been denied so many opportunities for various professions because people didn't think they were smart enough or strong enough or whatever. And we hear people being critical of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, thinking that they're getting unqualified people. And actually, it could be the opposite. You could have a person more qualified to be in that position, but because of the prejudice, they're not allowed to get that position. And I think the people who are against DEI are the ones who are promoting MWM Project. You've heard of that, right? Mediocre White Male Project. Or sometimes IWM, Incompetent White Male Project. I think we can see a lot of that right now. There are also some incompetent women, too, but many more men. And the point is that people have prejudice such that they don't allow people to get jobs. The Native Americans were treated like objects, like stones. They were just stones to be overcome when they had their settler colonial project. They were in the way. And then black people were treated like animals and worked to death many times. But if a person from any of those groups would come and speak truth to power, speak up, they would be tagged as the enemy. And they put their lives in jeopardy. Sometimes they'd be killed. And that brings me to the last woman, Viola Liuzzo. How many of you know about her? Yeah. She did attend Unitarian Universalist Church in Detroit after having a falling out with the Catholic Church. And Viola always had an open mind and affection for black people. Once her mom managed a small grocery store, and she was there, and she gave her own money to a black child, because even though they were poor, she knew that the black child came from a poorer family. She was a mother of 5, married to Jim Liuzzo, who was an auto worker, a member of the union, a friend of Jimmy Hoffa's. And she made a friend, Sarah Evans, from the age of 10, her closest friend, who was black. And Sarah became the nanny for those 5 children when Viola was working, or when she was doing her social justice for like education reform and economic justice and go to jail. She was quite active. And so Sarah would be the nanny, the second mom to these children. She's best known for what happened in Selma, Alabama in 1965. She was watching the TV and seeing how people were being beaten and some people were being killed. And then she heard Martin Luther King calling for people to come to Selma to fight for black people's right to vote. It's amazing, fighting for them to vote. And he especially called on the clergy, one of them being James Reeb, the Unitarian Universalist minister, who lost his life for the cause. Viola, she was nursing people that were wounded and so on, but her main job was to have her use her car to drive people around because, black people couldn't own cars. They didn't have the money. And one time she was driving with a young black man named Leroy Moten, and she was being followed by a group of 4 white men, being pushed off to the side of the road and so on. for 40 miles. And she was singing at the top of her lungs, "We shall overcome," to quell her fear about these malcontents, these perpetrators. And then once they drove by, they shot her dead. Leroy survived. He said he was unconscious. We don't know what he was. He was probably too afraid to really talk about what really happened. The next day, President Lyndon Johnson called Viola's husband, Jim, and said, "I don't think she died in vain, because this is going to be a battle, all out as far as I'm concerned." And Jim told the president, "My wife died for a sacred battle, the rights of humanity. She had one concern and only one in mind." She took the quote from Abraham Lincoln, which actually comes from Declaration of Independence, but he took the quote of Abraham Lincoln that all men are created equal, and that's what she believed. Johnson invested many FBI investigators to find the killers, and they did rather quickly. And they went to trial, and they were found not guilty by an all-white jury. But then later, they were charged in federal court, denying civil rights to Viola, and they got 10 years in prison, federal prison. I should say that one of the reasons that people don't know more about her is that she was demonized, and there was a smear campaign by the FBI, primarily by Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, and they said that she was a communist, said she went down south to have sex with black people, and they made a comment about her being a mother and leaving 5 kids behind. I mean, a father can do that, no problem, right? But she had Sarah to take care of the kids and her husband. But she felt moved to do this work of justice. So Martin Luther King Jr. said of Leoza, "If physical death is a price some must pay to save us and our white brothers from eternal death of the spirit, then no sacrifice can be more redemptive." Arguably, it was Viola's martyrdom that made the Voting Rights Act possible in 1965. And that's the act that made black people finally full citizens in this country. Going all the way back to 1619, when a Dutch trader came to Jamestown with black slaves. It took from 1619, 1965, that black citizens de jure are full citizens. Of course, it didn't end racism, but that's an important time, important act. And it's being gutted by the Supreme Court, too. So let us have a moment of silence to celebrate and honor these women of note as they teach us to rise to what Abraham Lincoln said, the better angels of our nature.